Good morning, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of WASAC and College Promise, we are so glad that you've joined us today. My name is Abby Chen. I'm a member of the WASAC team. And throughout the summer, WASAC's been able to engage in conversations, discussions, and formal feedback opportunities to shape what we're calling the Regional Challenge Grant. I can't wait to get started with our panelists today. But before we dive in, I've got a couple of key points I want you all to keep in mind for our engagement today. The first thing is that we'd love to know who's in the room with us today. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and use the chat throughout today's conversation to continue conversations among one another. We also have 30 minutes reserved for question and answer as part of the panel conversation. So please note that all of your questions should be put through the question and answer feature. Usually on your Zoom screen, that's a little pop-up that happens on the bottom. It's an icon with conversation bubbles. And it's the reminder to not put questions in the chat, but to put questions in the Q&A. That way we can ensure that our panelists see them. So as we get started today, I want to provide a little framework for the importance of why we're talking about this Regional Challenge Grant opportunity in Washington. Over the past 20 years, Washington's had a surprisingly low and stagnant rate of post-secondary enrollment from high school seniors who are going into post-secondary within a year of graduation. Our state average is about 60%, and that's around 9 percentage points below the national average. And so one of the actions that we've been able to take as a state is that during the 2022 legislative session, Washington established the Regional Challenge Grant. It's an investment that creates competitive grants for new and existing community-based regional partnerships to bolster college and career pathways. What we mean by this really practically is that we want to increase post-secondary enrollment rates, both for students who are coming directly from high school and adults who are returning to education, and to also increase the completion rate for students' post-secondary credentials. Washington has a statewide goal of 70% credential attainment, and credential is the overarching term we're using. It includes degrees, certificates, apprenticeship programs, and more. But notably, the grant calls our attention to inequities in education. It requires us to focus on enrollment and completion initiatives that close the equity gaps for students. Specifically, it calls us to think about students of color, students from low income backgrounds, English language learners, students with disabilities, and foster and homeless youth. I want to make particular note that we know this is not an exhaustive list. And we also know that Washington students experience intersectional identities that really create overlapping and compounding systems of disadvantage. Those perpetuate disparities. And here we are in the conversation today. And so using the Regional Challenge Grant investments, WASAC can support a major increase in the number of partnerships that are located in our regions who serve their communities to share this commitment to improving post-secondary enrollment and student success. We recognize that local leaders are the experts in knowing their community needs because they're members of the community themselves, and that there's a lead role in shaping those initiatives. So these investments will really help existing partnerships grow and scale impact, as well as helping partnerships get started who want to do this work in their local region. And so the Regional Challenge Grant therefore represents a really powerful systems change opportunity. Because these partnerships can grow and scale their impact, we know that by investing locally and regionally, Washington is going to be able to move the needle, close some of those gaps, and really reach those statewide goals that we have set. Most recently in our process, on Monday of this week, we wrapped up a public comment period for our draft letter of interest, which is essentially slated to be the first step in our application process. I want to thank everyone who responded to the public comment period. Your comments help us make decisions and create clarity in our processes. For those curious, a new draft of a letter of interest as a result of that public comment will be shared with our council. We have a 10-member council on August 31st, which is the council meeting. You can always stay up to date on our process with the Regional Challenge Grant by visiting our website, and I'm going to have a colleague of mine put that in the chat for easy access. And then I wanted to note that our council meetings are open to the public. So the meeting on August 31st that's coming up is open. It's also virtual. And so we'll go ahead and share a link in the chat as well for the information to join those meetings. And so with that, I have the pleasure of attending to our event today. In preparation for this upcoming Regional Challenge Grant, WASAC, in partnership with College Promise, is hosting today's virtual community of practice. During this event, you'll have the opportunity to hear from organization leaders across the country, sharing their key learnings of successful community partnerships and really the power of collective impact. Partnerships provide an opportunity to galvanize the community, building shared ownership and action on post-secondary enrollment and career pathways. And so we're really excited to have this conversation today. I have the pleasure of introducing today's facilitator, Christopher Cabaldon. Christopher Cabaldon is a partner at Capital Impact, a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government, and mayor in residence at the Institute for the Future. He became the mayor of West Sacramento in 1998 and has served as the chair of Jobs, Education, and Workforce for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. His West Sacramento Home Run initiative implemented universal preschool, college savings accounts, paid career pathway internships, digital badges, free community college, and first in the nation letters of admission to college to every graduating high school student in his city. Christopher, it's a total pleasure to have you here today. Please go ahead and take it away.
Abby, thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Wasac is such an important national leader in this space, and the regional challenge is an outstanding opportunity for the many communities in Washington State to rally to achieve the 70% goal, but so many of the other equity and economic and educational attainment goals for Washington. So thanks so much for having us. Today, I want to promise our panel and our discussion is going to be with some innovators, some exemplars from throughout the country. They are examples and resources. We don't want to convey that these are exactly things to copy, or these are the only kinds of things that folks should be thinking about for the regional challenge, but instead to think let's open up some new doors of how we might think about tackling some of these challenges. We're also going to get into some of the weeds, like how do you do data sharing? How does the governance arrangements work? How does this really happen? So it won't just be a conversation about collaboration where, hey, a bunch of us came together in Ohio or Pennsylvania or California, and then by immaculate conception, 6 months later, everything's turned out great. Now we're gonna also talk about some of the obstacles and how to overcome them in this process of regional collaboration. So we have an amazing panel, and let me turn to each of our panelists one at a time to give us. We'll learn a lot about the initiatives that they're undertaking and the work that they're doing and their journeys along the way. But just for the quick intro, maybe Dr. Lori Cortez, can I ask you to share just the elevator speech about who is Lori Cortez from South Valley College?
Thank you, Christopher. Yes, so I'm Lori Cortez at Sauk Valley Community College. That's in Northwest Illinois. We are a very rural area. And over the past 4 years, we've developed our version of a Promise program. It's the Impact program. And being in a rural area here, we have a lot of folks who don't like the word free. And so we developed a program whereby if kids do community service while they're in high school, and of course, while they're here at Sauk Valley Community College, they can attend Sauk Valley Community College without having to pay any tuition or fees. This is regardless of GPA or attendance or even their major. So if they want to go into truck driving and welding, or if they want to go into pre-law, pre-med, we have those programs here at Sauk Valley Community College, and students can earn 100% of their education primarily through community service, and that's with our Impact program.
Terrific. All right, thank you so much. John Jones from Hope Toledo, give us a little insight into you and what Hope does.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And it's real good to be here. I'm thrilled to be here with everybody in Wasac. Thank you for the invite and putting this together. Again, I'm John Jones. I serve here with Hope Toledo. Hope Toledo is a nonprofit educational entity with the mission to support and ensure high quality education from birth to career. And we do this through our work in early childhood education to post-secondary education and access. And the goal for us is to create generational economic change that can benefit our families and our communities. So we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, as we go along, but we have sort of two angles to this. One is that we are working very hard on the early childhood ed side because we believe a strong start for our kids means a strong future. And then we are also working on the post-secondary access, and we've developed our version of a Promise program here in Toledo. We've piloted it now with one school, one of our high schools here in the city of Toledo, wherein we offer access to post-secondary. That's 4-year, 2-year, or trade school certifications, things of that nature. And after financial aid, we cover tuition, room, board, books, fees in order to try to mitigate the barrier of cost to post-secondary. We've got several other components of our work there on the promise side, but ultimately the goal is to not just to get them to school or their program, but to get them through and ultimately gainfully employed. So again, great to be here, and we're real thrilled to share just a version of our success. The last component that I'll add is that we are a 2-generational college promise program. So on that end of our work, we provide access for the student that graduates high school, entering post-secondary, but then we also extended that effort to one parent or legal guardian because we believe that you need a multi-generational solution for the multi-generational challenges that we see occurring in our communities and with our families. And so our goal is to try to break that cycle, and we do so through the power of education.
All right, great. I'm already excited. This panel's shaping up great. Thanks so much. And we're going to, David Russ, let's turn to you. Say Buffalo is one of the best known initiatives and programs around the country. But for those of us that may not be aware of it, can you give us a little insight into Say Yes and to David Russ?
Thanks, Christopher. Good morning to everyone on the West Coast from Buffalo, New York. Happy to be with you today. I'd like to open with a big shout out to WASAC. I think what they're doing is incredible and innovative and really needed. And to see a state take this approach using collective impact models to provide educational attainment and economic mobility and doing it with adapting, not adopting is it's really wonderful to see. So that's awesome. My name's Dave Rust. I'm the CEO with Say Yes Buffalo. We're a little over 10 years old at this point in time. And I would broadly say we're a Promise Program Plus. So we do have a scholarship promise for every graduate of our public and charter schools here in the city of Buffalo, around 40,000 students total. Say Yes was intended to provide access to every student in our public school district to earn a post-secondary degree, and then choice within that. So what I mean by that is they can attend any state school, 100 private colleges around the country. If you want to get a quick certificate to be a phlebotomist, there's a pathway for you. If you're interested in pre-law, pre-med, social work, education, there's a pathway for you there too. In our decade, we've had really compelling results, and I'll point to a couple of whys behind that. First of all, the graduation rate in our city schools has gone up from 49% to 79% over the last decade. Our post-secondary access is up 23%, post-secondary completion is up 18%. So we've been able to effectively move the needle. And what was the biggest challenge in our community? I mean, if you looked at that graduation rate of 49% a decade ago, I don't think anybody thought that was acceptable. And what we all rallied behind was the importance of degree completion leading to economic mobility for students in our community. I think 2 real things drove that. One was we have comprehensive supports from age 3 all the way through post-secondary completion, including job access. We screen for early childhoods. We're now running 3-year-old programs in the Buffalo Public Schools, social service caseworkers, health caseworkers, extended learning time support, Saturday academies, mentoring and internships. Our most recent effort, which we're announcing in a few weeks, is a modern youth apprenticeship program, working in partnership with CareerWise Colorado, who's an amazing partner, and PAIA/New America to complement our scholarship as we continue to try and innovate and meet the needs of students and families in our community. So we're growing. I think we've been a great mix of responsible and effective. And you would use the word partnership, Christopher. We could not do this without partnership. You know, we were fortunate to take and launch the Say Yes collective impact model, which brings our partners together regularly behind our common goals of more high school graduates and more post-secondary graduates. We still continue to meet 10 years later regularly with our school district, union leadership, our county government, our city government, foundations, parent, student leadership, higher ed partners behind our common goals. I think the beauty of collective impact models is they can be replicated for other important issues in community, whether it's the place, whether it's job access, racial equity. I could go on and on about that. So, you know, it's been good work. It's had compelling results. And again, we're really fortunate to lead this critical work in our community, and happy to be a part of this conversation today. So thanks, Christopher.
Thanks so much, David. And Say Yes has been not just an outstanding example in Buffalo, but also has been very active in sharing its learning, both its successes and some of its challenges throughout the country. And I know for us in California and probably others on this panel, Say Yes has been an inspiration. So thanks so much for joining us today. So let's get right into it. So one of the distinctive elements of the regional challenge is its emphasis on cross-sector partnerships. That the collaborations that the regional challenge envisions are about like dreaming big and making very transformative community change. That's more than just the partnership. Let me see if I'm the vice provost at Bellevue. Can I form a partnership with Washington State? The regional challenge is bigger than that, and it is affirmatively looking at other sectors being not just at the table, but really co-equal partners in every way, whether that's community-based organizations, cities or counties, workforce boards, labor unions, the full gamut. And so let me, and David, you already touched on this. Lori, I want to turn to you just at the outset, because I know one of the key learnings from the efforts that you've been doing with employers is thinking about how to build that employer connection in a way that doesn't just get the CEO to sign a pledge at a breakfast and go home and say, hey, we have a partnership, but is real. And it's providing meaningful pathways for the students at the college. So could you give us some insight about how that cross-sector partnerships get built, and then how they actually work in practice, and how you curate them as an educator?
Sure. So with all of our career technical education credentials, whether it be a certificate or a degree, we have an advisory board that is made up primarily of local employers that hire people from those fields, whether it be welding and manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare. And those advisory councils then inform our curriculum. So we heard at one point in time that our ag folks needed training in hazmat or CDL. We then implemented a hazmat or CDL training within our agriculture program. So we're getting that feedback, and not only are we getting it and listening to it, we're actually doing something to help them to meet their needs, to meet the employer's needs in our area. And most of our advisory councils meet quarterly, and it's not just a sign on a dotted line. They are actually providing valuable feedback for what they need to see in their current employees, and we can go back to do the retraining with them or for future needs of them. And so those advisory councils are headed by our faculty and our deans, our academic deans in that area. So we get that information and we do something with it, which is, I think, is most critical, because yes, we can be there and yes, we can listen, but it's being responsive. I see a lot of community college folks in this room, and you know that a community college is responsive to the community. As a college, you belong to the community. So listening to that has been critical for us. So we built those partnerships with our employers in the area, listened to them. And when we heard that they had plenty of jobs available, and this was even prior to COVID, that they had great wages and plenty of jobs available, but they lacked a trained and qualified workforce from which to choose, that's when we started our Promise program, our impact program here, where we are able to then take those students who graduate from our high schools, who aren't going on to any college or university, and getting them here at SALK and getting them to be trained and qualified to be a valuable part of our local workforce. So it keeps businesses here so they don't have to move elsewhere to find employees. It also helps the per capita income of the area, which means less reliance on public aid and public service. So really, this is a win-win partnership for everyone involved in the Sauk Valley community.
Great, and I think the way you describe the win-win is really interesting and really important here, which is that it's a win from everyone that's come to the table is winning in the things that they care about in their day-to-day work, right? It isn't just everyone's coming to the table to help you at the college accomplish your goals or to meet your objectives. They are doing that, but they're doing it, they're inspired to like be really active about it and take some chances and invest in real resources and to bust some heads in order to accomplish those goals, because it's also advancing what they are trying to do. And so as we're thinking about let's get the question around this, a shared theories of change, or what I like to call an intersecting theory of change, where the different players and actors are coming together around a common goal, but also a recognition that you're all coming to the table with distinct goals too, and trying to figure out how to align those up so that everybody is winning together. And John, maybe we could turn to Hope around the same exact question, because in some ways, I mean, you're coming from outside of just, you're not the vice chancellor in a college. You're trying to figure out how to rally the community and to think about some of these challenges, but also the opportunities in very cross-sectoral ways, whether it's the two-generation approach or many of the things you described. So can you help us think about how a place in Washington might think about, given your experience at Hope, might think about designing a cross-sector partnership?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love what Lori's doing there in the Illinois neck of the woods. And we did come at it, Chris, from somewhat of a different lens, because obviously our organization is a nonprofit. We are a newer nonprofit and quite literally formed out of the need and impetus built around this work. So our initial conversation was driven in our community around early childhood ed. But at the same time, we were having this discussion, as David mentioned, very similarly around completion, i.e. graduation rates, and the need to increase those, but more importantly, the need to increase college, both post-secondary attendance, but post-secondary completion, whether that is degree or certificate completion. So we were having all those conversations at the same time, as most communities probably do. Ours did. We had one steering group over here talking early childhood. We had another steering group over here talking post-secondary. And so we started dealing with this cross-functional, cross-sector kind of approach. And quite literally on the promise side of our work, and what really gave the large impetus for the movement, was we had an individual and their family foundation that was extremely engaged and said, how can we help to kickstart, jumpstart, move this thing forward quickly? So fortunately, his family, they made a pretty large investment to support the first class that we had graduating, but then we were able to get a very large support from our corporate community, particularly one institution, ProMedica. They jumped in very quickly and said, we want to support. And so now you have corporate, you have private donors, philanthropic. And then when we start talking partnerships, the conversation, particularly on the post-secondary side, was how do we engage each of our post-secondary institutions, particularly those that are local, but also those across the state. So our program is very specific because we offer the extension of post-secondary attendance to those schools that are in-state schools, publicly funded schools, and there was a specific design for that. And we've got a few exceptions to that rule, only because of location and locale, but each of those individual institutions brought partners to the table. So right now today, what we're able to do is we have a cross-functional, I would say, advisory committee that meets on a regular basis. That group now is forming into both a leadership group as well as a working group that allows for these conversations to go back and forth. We then have individual groups that meet on each of our institutional campuses where we have a larger locus of students that are attending. So for instance, I'll use as an example, Owens Community College. We have a whole team that meets with us on a bi-weekly basis so we can navigate through what are the needs of our children and our students as they're navigating through this process. We found that having those different groups are crucial for us to be able to provide the supports necessary and to do the wraparound supports. We were also fortunate in this cross-functional kind of way, service sector kind of way, was to bring together social service organizations. So folks from mental health board, those institutions that provide health and well-being services related to mental health, they are at the table. The social workers and others are at the table, and we've also formed partnerships. So we found that the forging of MOUs and various agreements are necessary as we walk our way through this process to get down the road. And then last I'll say is that we've also, because we are a nonprofit, we've reached out so that we can forge those relationships and partnerships on both a city level, a county level, a statewide level, and now on a national level. We were fortunate last year, and we started doing the work this year to get a grant from the Kresge Foundation, which allowed us to strengthen our partnerships with our community partners, our post-secondary ed partners, so we can bring them to the table in a little bit of a different way and really start having those kind of conversations that not only focus on the academic side and the attainment that's necessary, but more importantly, those wraparound supports that can then drive towards the change that we need to see happen for all of our young people that are participating in our program.
Great, that's fascinating. And David, if I can turn to you, because I want to pick up on some of what John described, because what John described is sounds like a beautifully elegant ecosystem of partners that have come together and have both the flexibility to create together and to collaborate and to share trust, but also they have some hard documents like MOUs that are required. But what struck me listening to David was listening to John made me think about my own region and the organic evolution of all of that, and over time the building of trust in order for that to happen and unexpected partners come to the table. And obviously, in a regional challenge like this, one of the challenges I know that several of the folks that we've heard from in Washington have said is that, look, we have to write down all of that at the very beginning, right? So hope and I think say yes like evolved over time, and we've got to describe. We have to the WASAC is hoping that we will describe what does your governance look like? Who's the fiscal agent? Where does the check go? Who's on the board? Right, a lot of decisions that have to be made at the beginning before you've actually started collaborating, perhaps on this kind of a project. So I'm wondering, David, given the extensive experience that SAYS has had and that you've led in this space, if you have advice for folks that are starting these collaborations at the regional scale about how to bake in the kind of cultural of collaboration that's necessary for success that John just described, and also deal with the hard realities of needing to be able to describe for, in this case, one funder, but potentially others as well, at the very beginning, before you've even necessarily met everybody at the table, how it's all going to work out.
Sure. I mean, our setup is very similar to John's in Hope Toledo, where we are a not-for-profit organization with all of our own infrastructure in-house. I could answer any of those questions about board, finance, HR, our team. But I think maybe where I'd start is, we redid our strategic plan a year or so ago. So we look to do that every 3 years. And I think we neatly identified the 4 roles of us as an intermediary plus. And maybe I'll go through those for a moment, and then I'll talk about, some of the collective impact work. So we do view one of our critical roles as a convener and facilitator. And our responsibility is to bring individuals, groups, and organizations together to work towards a shared goal. I think second for us is data collection. I think if you're going to ask people for their time, their political will, and their resources, we never wanted to be a slow, clunky nonprofit. We want to be able to show impact, which we have been. I think third, and this is a critical decision point I would make to anybody that is considering becoming an intermediary, is we are a services and scholarship provider. I think the scholarship is obvious, as is Modern Youth Apprenticeship. Our work, and we determined to bring a lot of this in-house, not all of it, was that we wanted to focus on those barriers that can prevent children from graduating high school or a post-secondary institution. And that's a lot of those comprehensive services I touched on earlier that John did, social services, health casework, mental health clinics, legal clinics, extended learning time, our parent supports, mentoring and internships, all of those that we've brought in. We've grown extensively. We'll at the end of this fiscal year employ around 150 people. We're forecasting another, 60 or 70 next year too. So we've had a lot of growth, and we didn't start that way though. And we do try and continue to try and partner. So for example, the mental health clinics in our schools and colleges are run by the behavioral health agencies. There was no need for those to be replicated, whereas there was no natural home for community schools. So we made the decision to be the service provider for community schools in Buffalo in close partnership with our school district. So those are the 3 areas that I focused on. I think the fourth that I would touch on briefly is sustainability of all this. And I could talk you through how I would essentially break SAYS into 2 cost centers, one being our scholarships and our endowment for that, and then the other being all of our services and supports that we run. But our premise is not to launch something unless we've got a path to sustainability from that, often from public sector. We view philanthropic seed capital as just that seed capital that should be sustained other areas so that we're not constantly, in a grant cycle. Now, within all that, we are the intermediary here. And while you'll hear me say a lot, adapt versus adopt, I think local context is critical. All the assets that exist in Buffalo are in each of the communities on this today. Everyone has health and human services and school districts and philanthropic partners and parent and student voice. But it needs to be adapted to local context. I think that's super important. But the facilitation, so it is our job to staff up our advisory body, our board, these services. It's important that I think somebody is paid to do that, at least in our community. It was, we needed the facilitation and the development of programs and structure that would bring everyone together behind this common cause that was really critical in Buffalo. And that structure and the intermediary role has effectively moved and helped Buffalo tremendously. We were in a really tough point a decade ago. Not that we're out of it. We've had a lot of challenges recently, including a devastating shooting at a grocery store, a block up the street from our office. So I'm not pretending the hard work is done, but we've really been responsible and effective in our community and helping students because of that foundation of collective impact. And say a couple of things, bringing it back to your question at the top, trust is built over time, being consistent, listening. I always say you can get it right or you can be right. If you need to be right, this work is probably not for us, right? And finding the win. And, in our early days, the trust was around the importance of college and post-secondary. That's evolved tremendously over the years to be able to take on a lot more because we've done what we said we were going to do. We're a diverse organization, an effective organization, but give yourself the time, be a listener, be a good partner. It's easy to look left and right at what people are doing wrong. This is about bringing people together behind things that are important and what we're doing right. So be kind, be patient, have the intermediary, give yourself the time to build the trust, and really incredible things can happen in any community when you're willing to take those steps and be consistent. Is we call it our operating committee here. That's our advisory committee, but whatever committees you have, it can be done if you're consistent and stick to it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we're going to come back to the intermediary question in a bit more detail in a little bit as well. And thanks for raising the collective impact lens. And this is one of the guiding principles behind what WASAC is trying to accomplish here, and one of the most promising approaches that meant that maybe all of us have been engaged in. I know my own experience in City Hall has been eye-opening. I'm a former community college vice chancellor too, so I speak both languages. But when we first contemplated the city being involved in preschool and internships, paid internships for career pathways and the promise and all the other elements, and I started joining these collective impact tables, it was a struggle. It was a real struggle for folks who weren't in education for two reasons. One was it felt like we were being asked to come to the table to help on their project, and it seemed like it was endless, like there was an infinite well. Oh, you're here for workforce development. Well, now you need to also be here for scholarships. So you're here for scholarships. You have to be here for wraparound supports. And I'm like, oh, well, I have to run a fire department and a police department. I have to provide clean water and pick up the trash too. And so thinking about how getting the design right from the perspective of attention and resources by all the players was an important part of building those cross-sector partnerships. And then also allowing people to have different objectives and goals. And this gets to part of what Lori was talking about earlier. So for us, although we cared very much, and I know this is true for a lot of mayors across the country, we care a lot about student achievement for itself. But you can only go so far in City Hall on that topic. And if you're like most cities, you don't run the schools, right? But you do run the police and fire and parks and everything else. And what turned out to be the key data metric that we cared about was not actually about math achievement or even high school graduation rates, but it was parents in our city worry that they are bad parents if they don't take their kids out of our city and move to a place with better schools. And one, that's wrong, right? We care about the sense of purpose and efficacy that our parents have. But two, we also don't want to lose all of our residents to wealthier communities that have quote unquote better schools. So our key metric was, what do people think about the schools in their community? Which is different from necessarily the specific metrics that the schools were themselves being held accountable for. And so what was important for us in our collective impact design and in our data design was understanding that we were going to the same strategies, and we were gonna line up on exactly the same work, but we had to be able to describe it in different ways that matched up with our needs. And you know, as a mayor, I deal with it all the time. Like, I want, if you're only willing to install solar panels and cut back on energy usage because it saves money, and you refuse to say, I'm trying to stop climate change and it's not man-made and whatever, fine, I'll take it, right? Whatever it needs for folks to come to the table and be energized around the work is really important. And so sometimes I think we think of these regional partnerships for education as it's education plus some people that we've asked to come help, as opposed to thinking about a true, authentic partnership across the sectors that really work. So, Lori, can maybe you can join the conversation about this question of shared measures and data, and how, especially across those two sectors of the college itself and employers, how you've designed that in a way that is meeting both the needs.
Sure. And it's not meeting just the needs of the employer or the students, but rather the entire region. So as I mentioned, we are a very rural region in Northwest Illinois here. And we have had an issue of population decline. We've lost 20% of our population in the last 20 years. That's significant. And when we point out to folks that this means that there's less money for our police, our fire, our roads, because there isn't a tax base here. And we're pointing that out. We're pointing out how businesses have closed up shop and left the area, how we're experiencing the brain drain that's being sung throughout rural America at this time. And we're pointing those things out. But when you look at communities that have a cross collaboration of a promise type program, including the entire state of Tennessee, which is a program where folks can earn their college tuition, you will see that the opposite is happening. People are flocking to Tennessee. They're having a population increase. You're seeing businesses move into the area because now they have a trained and qualified workforce from which to choose. When you have a promise program type program in your community, fewer families leave because they know if they stay in that area, their children can have the opportunity to go to college at no cost. So those are the metrics that we're using in our area. We're looking at population decline. I've talked about the income, how folks who have a college credential or degree typically make more money than those folks who don't. So that means that they're making more money, which means more discretionary income that they are able to buy homes, buy cars, tithe, give to our nonprofits, be more philanthropic. And again, you have that tax base there, which means more money for your police, your fire, your roads, and you have people that are retained. And with that community service component, which for us is absolutely critical, you now have kids learning more about their community. And it's truly eye-opening. I mean, yes, we could talk data all day long, and I can. But when you take a look at the heartstrings that are being developed between students or young people and not-for-profits like the YMCA or the YWCAs or our Lions, Rotaries clubs, those type of organizations in our area, the United Ways, those kids had no idea that such nonprofits existed in our area, and that they could be a part of actually helping out their neighbors, their community. And so they're developing those heartstrings, which even if they go off to a four-year university, data has shown if young people perform community service, they come back to that area and they stay in that area because they have developed those relationships. They've developed a sense of belonging. They've developed the sense that they can actually make an impact in that area. So yes, we have those data sharing elements, including number of community service hours, the tax base, how many folks are staying in the area because of this program. But also you have those heartstrings that go hand in hand with, so you have that heart and you have the mind.
Both are needed. So John, for Hope to know, what are some of the operational and outcomes metrics that y'all are deploying and using, and how did you agree on them? And right before you start, let me just remind folks who are with us as part of the session today that if you've got questions, please share them with us in the Q&A part of the Zoom dashboard. We've already got a few coming in, and we're going to be devoting a significant part of the remainder of the session to your questions. So please share them with us. And John, so let's get back to this whole data and metrics question and how Hope Toledo has been dealing with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're fortunate, and I say this without either shame or fear of contradiction. I don't believe that there is a need for anyone, and I encourage everyone listening on this call, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And so I'm real thrilled that folks like David is on this call, but also have been doing this work for as long as they've been doing it there at Say Yes Buffalo. So quite literally in our early days of doing this work, we started reaching out to multiple programs that were doing this in different ways, right? So Say Yes Buffalo, we went up to Kalamazoo, which is not too far from Toledo. We went over to Pittsburgh. We went down to El Dorado, Arkansas. We talked to the folks in Tennessee. We talked to the folks all the way out in California. And not necessarily in Sacramento, Chris, but we went down to the San Diego neck of the woods and other spaces. And so we've talked to a lot of folks. And our purpose and intent for that was a couple things. We knew what we needed here locally. And so I underscore what David shared earlier about all of these things exist in each of our communities, but it's all about the local context and how they are put to place. So we knew in our community that yes, we were seeing graduation rates not improving like everyone wanted them to and would expect to. We knew that the post-secondary attendance, degree completion, and all those things, those rates were extremely low in our neck of the woods. Part of the reason why we identified the school that we did to pilot this, which is Jessup Wakeman Scott High School, part of the reason why we identified them is because their graduation rates were relatively low comparing across the state, so on and so forth. But we also saw that the post-secondary attendance rate was extremely low. It was about a third of those that were graduating. And we're like, that cannot be the norm that we're seeing. But with all the other challenges that face individuals and communities, it was a very real number. So our metrics that we've developed came as a part of looking at how do we address these types of things. So number one, we're looking at what is the economic impact to our community, right? And this is not necessarily in order, so I'm not putting these in order of priority, but just listing them out. So one of those things was economic impact, right? How as a city and as a region, how are we impacting that? And we believe education is a driver towards economic impact, that the better educated and that better education lies around, as we mentioned earlier, regardless of level of schooling, whether it's 4-year, 2-year trade, anything in that post-secondary space, if it's a phlebotomy certificate, that helps for that individual to go get a gainfully employed job and can then be able to turn it around. I say often here when we're talking to larger groups, my goal is to create and see more tax producers versus tax consumers, right? How do we navigate through that space in order to drive it? So one is the economic impact. That economic impact is seen both in population increase or the slowdown in our population decline, but it's also seen in the types of jobs being able to be attained and obtained by a very qualified workforce. The second component is that post-secondary attendance rate. So graduating high school is wonderful, but do they go on to pursue something in that post-secondary space? And we want to see what that looks like. And we want to see that number increase. We also want to see what are the completion rates, whether that's a 2-year, 4-year, again, or a degree certificate or certificate inside of that space. How do we see that completion happening? We're also looking at things like the pursuit or the need to secure social services. So we believe that the more folks that are gaining these education things, it will impact the health side. So we are very strong on things like social determinants of health, believing that education is a driver towards better health equity. And so we think that, and we know as we see the research, that when I'm able to get a job that often offers me insurance, now I'm able to access better health services for my family. I'm able to do better prenatal care for my children and care for those children after they're born, so on and so forth. So we look at things like how many children, what's our infant mortality rate? How many children are seeing the age of 1? So we're looking at those different types of things and including that in the data set. Let me be real clear. Some of those things we had up front, walking in the door, knowing we wanted to look at those. Some of them have come about as a organic growth as we look at these things to say, oh, we should probably be tracking that data, particularly because of our 2-gen approach. How are parents and children and their children on the post-secondary side, how are they pursuing this together? What is the achievement or completion outcomes for a parent now that their child is involved, or vice versa? If the child is involved and the parent decides to go back, does that help that child persist at a better rate than the rest of the group that may not have that? And so as we're looking at those data points, those are the key components. And we know that capturing the data is crucial early and often, but then also being able to report it out. So we're fortunate because we got a partnership with Northwestern University. They've been our research partners on the Promise side from the very beginning, and have been able to study both our first cohort, our second cohort. Now we're in our third cohort of students that are working through that process. And the institutional research that they're doing is really driven around a 2-gen approach. How do we look at those parents? And they're actually leading us down the road to actually look at how do we offer better supports, particularly to our parent scholars, as they are trying to raise younger children as well as their high school graduate children that are now pursuing post-secondary. So it's those kind of data points that we're looking at, and how do we pull all that together?
There's so much there. That's really rich, John. I mean, the greatest hits tour that you took around the country. You just ticked off like anybody. If I was going to go see about these topics, you went and saw. So learning both what they're doing, but also sometimes just getting. And one of the challenges that some regions have faced as well. You know, our institutional research office said we just can't collect that data point, doesn't exist. But then you find someone in Tennessee that, you know, you find a researcher that found a way to construct that data point from 3 other data sets that we do have in Washington, for example. Or I'm trying to get this piece of data, but the general counsel at the WID says, no, that's going to violate FERPA if you get that. And but no, you find somebody in Cleveland that says, no, I have a letter from the general counsel here that shows how it's perfectly legal to do this. So relying on this network, and even just the 3 panelists that we have today are exemplars of that. Relying on the network, a lot of that. Even though we're not reinventing the wheel, a lot of folks are driving right now or bicycling right now, and there are so many resources and examples out there that can be incorporated into the design on the data side for the partnerships that are here. So let's turn to the model locally, and David's already introduced us to this, and actually a couple of the questions are exactly in this space. Like, hey, I'm excited about it. Like, how did SAYS come to happen? I want to start that. What do I do? What do I do with that? And so let me ask each of you, maybe starting with you, David, is sort of about how SAYS came to exist and get funded. And if you were going back in time in the state of New York, we're offering this WASAC Regional Challenge, right at the moment when, you know, SAYS was being conceived. What might some advice or some lessons be for folks in Washington from the SAYS organizational experience, like as a nonprofit and the funding strategy? What are some of the key lessons that might be applicable for our friends here in Washington?
Sure. Well, I will start with, we were the huge beneficiary of George Weiss and his generosity in founding Say Yes to Education. You know, we completed a national RFP to earn the Say Yes designation. I'm a huge Bills fan. I always say that the day Say Yes picked Buffalo was the biggest day in our city's history because of the lives it can change, bigger than a Super Bowl, perhaps. You know, so we were really lucky to have the seed capital. And that was a point in time when people were not investing in Buffalo. You know, I think we've become a pretty interesting place over the last 10 to 15 years with, you know, growing entrepreneurial community, growing tech hubs, a focus on the mid-sized industrial city, because there's a lot of Buffaloes and Toledos around the country with similar challenges and similar opportunities in front of us. But that was a point in time when people were not investing here. So we'll always be, you know, indebted to Say Yes to Education and the huge resources that they invested in Buffalo and really best in class technical expertise. So that's how we were founded. I think the benefit of when you're an intermediary and you do have some resources to launch the services while you're figuring out the sustainable funding streams, I found that really, really helpful as well too. So your question was, looking back, are there things that you would do different? I think one of the real lessons we learned was that the supports that we had in our public school system were needed on our higher ed campuses as well too. We spent our first 5 or 6 years building a lot of infrastructure in our public school system, and appropriately so. Nobody has all the resources in the world to do this work. But as we started to test our early data points, we noticed that college access was up, completion was up, but persistence was flat and perhaps falling by a percentage point or two. We were able at that point in time to earn an investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to essentially take the resources we had been able to embed in Buffalo's public schools and put it onto our largest feeder campuses. While students can attend almost 200 colleges through Say Yes Buffalo, most of our students stay here. About 85% of our students stay within the 21 colleges within the region, which is good. It's good for our workforce. It also allows for aspirational students to take their talents to those other schools. But we found that we really needed those supports, that if you're senior year of high school and didn't have stable living conditions or were hungry, that those were going to show up on the college campus as well too. So we added college success counselors, behavioral health clinics on the campus. We built a college success course with the colleges that's instructed in the Buffalo Public Schools now. I think we took the appropriate steps to do that. And I would have done that at day one if we were starting over. I think that's the biggest adjustment I would make, because we budgeted towards and aimed for really aspirational goals around high school completion, but also post-secondary completion. And we budgeted for our K-12 supports. So it's a lesson we had to learn. Even Kalamazoo and Pittsburgh, I think, weren't old enough to learn those lessons when we launched. And similar to John, we did learn from other communities, say Syracuse as well. But that was the one big adjustment that I would make programmatically.
And you and John have both at least implied that you'd have a hard time imagining this work proceeding without having a 501c3 nonprofit as an anchor or a hub. Is that right? And at least in the way that it's played out in your region, and in terms of thinking about how to create one, if you don't have one in your current region before. If we think about the regional challenge potentially as being your wealthy donor, basically, to get you started, how might you think about using those resources to build a sustainable intermediary for the long run?
Yeah, we had the benefit of starting fresh and from scratch and building an organization, and we were able to represent the community we live in because of that, attract incredibly young talent that's going to go on to leadership positions, to Say Yes as a career springboard. So much good came out of the intermediary. I simply think we could not have done it without. I think in some communities, a community foundation could potentially play that role, or a place like that. But so I don't think we're the only path, but I think it is an excellent choice to have a 501c3 intermediary whose job it is to work on this. And then look what's happened because we've done this. We met our early metrics. We did what we said we were going to do. And now we're able to run the 3-year-old programming and add modern youth apprenticeship and really evolve to meet other critical needs for students and families in our city. And that's a benefit that a place like a foundation may not have. So I think it's a really important thing to have when launching this work. And it is somebody's job then, right? All our partners are super busy, right? All of our partners these aren't jobs, they're lifestyles that we all choose to do, right? There's not a lot of extra hours in the day to pull from to ask someone to take on the intermediary role. So I think that's my strong plug for it, acknowledging there are, some other places and communities that could do it as well.
If I could jump in, Chris, real quick,
yeah,
I have to underscore what David just said. I by no means is doing it as in this fashion the only way to do it, but I would clearly advocate that if there is a way to bring together your community in this kind of fashion, and that's what we did. So we had multiple meetings across a year's worth of time before, the quote Hope Toledo space was born. And what we also found, and what David said at the end is so critical, is that we found several organizations that have been in existence for a really long time, are partners with us, but couldn't take on doing this extra piece, if I could call it extra, but that convening and the collaborating and doing all that work, it is a literal full-time job. And so our partners with the YWCA, which is our Child Care Resource and Referral, our partners with the United Way, and several others, our community foundation, they're partners with us. Those folks have seats on our board inside of the space. But what we found was that for them to take that on, to say, yes, I'm going to do that work, and be the one to do all of that convening, tended to be a bit farther than what they, were prepared to go at that time, but the need was so great. And so I saw one question even in the chat, the need was so great. So you're trying to move with speed, but you're also trying to make sure that you're developing the necessary trust that's needed in community. And so by being able to develop Hope Toledo, it was very crucial that we had a very broad and cross-sector, cross-functional partnership that was developed with folks from across the board. So our university was involved, our community college was involved, all the way down to, when I say down to all the way folks that were in the early childhood sector, and we had folks from all over the space involved in that mix in order to develop it. So it did two things for us. It built the trust. So then when we say, hey, we're standing up and we're doing this, and now we're fortunate because we've secured some ARPA funding through the American Rescue Plan to help braid in with the other dollars that we have. But it wasn't this huge community battle. It was like, oh yeah, they're doing that. Let's throw some support behind it and let's keep it moving. Now, that doesn't mean that it's that simple, because God knows it is not. However, it helps when you start to have those kind of conversations. And then when you're trying to position yourself somewhat in a national light to try to drive better additional resources, new and unique models that can come into play, it opens the door so significantly. So it's huge, but it also is a lot of work to develop that community trust as you're building that space out. But having that nonprofit is crucial.
And Christopher, if I may too, yeah. So building upon the what John was just mentioning, I see a lot of community college and university folks on this call, and most of you should have a foundation, your college foundation, your university foundation, and that's what we did at Sauk Valley Community College. Is we enlisted the help of our Sauk Valley College Foundation to serve as our 501c3. And at that point in time, and I don't think I'm speaking out of term here, there was a national article written about it a few months ago. At that time, that foundation did not have a strategic plan. They weren't very sophisticated. They did the typical pancake breakfast, which are great, right? It's great to bring folks to the table, but they didn't have a specific strategic direction. So when the college presented this idea to them about fundraising for our impact program, they took it on and they ran with it. So it became a strategic direction for that 501c3. And then of course, working with our K through 12 partners, many of those who also have foundations, we were able to partner with them and have, there's an entire school district, actually there's 3 entire school districts that are completely funded because of their high school foundations. So harnessing the collective power of those other foundations in our area, including and the municipalities, private donors, businesses. When you have a 4-pronged funding approach, you have that sustainability to be able to propel your program forward, and using, again, the foundations, private donors, municipalities, and businesses. And I think I mentioned it before, one of the things I wish that I would have known looking back is, not using the word free, because truly our program is earned. If the students don't do the 25 hours of community service each year while they're in high school, they are out of the running for this program. And then that also helps our not-for-profits. So again, a lesson learned. When we went on this $10 million fundraising campaign, we had a lot of nonprofits in the area really worried that we were going to take their donors or take their funds. And that has not happened. And they are not only not seeing that not happening, but they're also getting a cadre of hundreds of volunteers that can help out their organization. So in the past 90 days, we've had over 600 students complete 3,000 hours of community service right here in this tiny little town of the Sauk Valley. So those nonprofits are now seeing that return of getting those kids involved and getting them volunteering. So those are the two lessons I really wish I would have known going into it. But we've recovered from those lessons, and now we have a sustainable $10 million endowment for our program. And again, made up of those different funding streams.
That's great, Lori, and I think it's a great counterpoint also to the 501c3 independent intermediary, that as you're thinking about both local context and what the scope and complexity is of what you're trying to accomplish, right? So in this particular case, we're thinking about specific workforce pathways where it's principally the employer sector and the college trying to align what they're doing together with the needs and the aspirations of students. It's a somewhat less complex lift than trying to solve maternal child health and 2 generations of equity. Or there's so the scope of players and the complexity of the design. In that case, I think what Lori, your experience is telling us, that a fully independent nonprofit, it may be overbuilding a solution. Whereas I think what we're hearing from David and John is you can't get to some of these deeper challenges that cover the lifetime of the student and the family with a partnership that is only the university and some one other thing. And so I think that we've teased out some of the ways in which this might vary depending on the challenge that you described, that you're trying to take on, and the complexity of the idea that you're tackling as well. John or Dave, just one other question, and this is about the role of institutions of higher education in this space. So you've talked about the independent intermediary as a key piece here, and I'm just curious how that relationship with the institutions of higher education has been throughout the life of your nonprofit. So do they see you as their tool to advance their objectives? Are you a fire starter and an annoyance? Are you a little of both? How is that? Because some of these collaborations often emerge, at least with higher education, just trying to do it by themselves, collaborating inside the tent essentially. And they can be nervous about inviting or creating independent outsiders. And so I'm curious if you can share with us, just real briefly before we go to Q&A, your experience with that relationship between the inside higher ed players and the independent intermediaries that you two have both built and nurtured.
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay, David.
Yeah, sure. I'll go to you, John.
I would say, Chris, I love the way you characterize it. It may be a little bit of both. Clearly, we have built some really solid partnerships, i.e., and I referenced earlier, we have several MOUs in place, particularly around Toledo. So with the University of Toledo, with Owens Community College, we're actually beginning to work on one now with Bowling Green State University, with Lord's University, so on and so forth. Central State, which is a little bit away from us, but they're still in Ohio. They're the state's only state-funded HBCU. And so we've been intentional about doing that. There is also a little bit of, here come those Hope Toledo people. They're a little bit irritating to us. But the reason for that is because when we walk into the space, it is clearly to advocate on behalf of our scholars. And so when we come into the space, it is to say, hey, we know you guys have a process, but talk to us about how our kids can get the very best out of this whole experience, meaning that, and being very honest, let's be very honest about this. Some of our young people, as they're navigating through, they're not going to do everything exactly as they should. Now, they'll tell us they did everything like they should, but we know better. And so our role is to be there to ensure that we help advocate, because all of us would know that the transition from a K-12 space into a post-secondary space, I don't care if you come from a perfectly nuclear family and have all the resources in the world, that transition is still difficult going from high school to any type of college. Nobody's there to, tap you on the shoulder and say, did you turn that work in? Nobody's given, quote unquote, that extension to turn it in on Friday as opposed to Monday, all of those different things. And so we come alongside to provide the wraparound supports. But what we have found, and I'm very, very grateful for this, what we have found is such phenomenal partnerships. I'll give you one example, and then David can take it from there. Owens Community College, their TRIO office, and most of you are familiar with TRIO support services. I'm sure you are. Their TRIO office has leaned in so heavily to our work that they're like, John, we don't care where the kids are going to school. Can we just provide services for them so that they can get prepared for their next level and their next journey? So they helped us host what we called Hope Hype, which was a 3-day, almost like a boot camp, in which we walked through everything from financial aid and all the components of financial aid, to academic advising, to time management, to what classes will you need to finish out your major, how to find internships, all those. I mean, we had a whole series of things that we offered, and they were helpful in doing it. And we have students that are going to at least 12 to 14 different institutions across the state of Ohio, but they leaned in and said, our partnership to help those students is way more critical. Now it's a win-win for them. Obviously, every student that they serve inside a TRIO is a number touched and all that good stuff. I get it, but it is a very genuine approach that we have with our partners, that they want to see these kids be successful. And it's also a win-win, right? If the kids are successful and they navigate through and they persist at a high level and graduate on time because the barrier of cost has been removed, that's a win for the university, for the college, so on and so forth. So we see ourselves as being good partners, and we really work hard to be that. Every now and again, we irritate them because we're going to ask questions, but at the end of the day, they understand why. And I think building those partnerships early is crucial, and then staying out of their way to a degree, but then also leaning in to advocate at the right times. I think it creates the right space of trust across the board.
It's great context, John. We here, our colleges here have had a history of working together. Even prior to Say Yes, there's what's called the Western New York College Consortium, and we've got 21 colleges and universities in the region. Buffalo, Western New York is a college town. Many of those in the city, some in the rural areas as far as, 80, 90 minutes away. But the fact remains they've always worked together. So we would take, I think, zero credit for that appropriately. I do think our role is to partner. And I'm very, words matter, and we partner as opposed to reform. I think we learned early on people want to be partnered with, not reformed. So our language is intentional about that. And that's the approach that we have taken. We've found some great avenues to work together, and our missions are in alignment. Like, what we want in our mission is exactly the same as our institutes of higher ed locally, which is more students attending those institutions and graduating those, certainly with an equity lens. And we found some real points to work together. For example, with the Gates Foundation investment, I don't know that any of us would have been that attractive to national philanthropy alone, but because we have this incredible partnership, we were able to secure resources to embed our supports onto those higher ed campuses. And our goal there was greater persistence. And we've seen that at each of those schools once we had those on the campuses. I think there's more we can do together. Higher ed is changing pretty dramatically. We've seen the decline in higher ed across the country since the pandemic hit. Like, that is real. We've got two colleges here that have just announced the beginning of a merger. We may see that other places, but we can help because we've got access to great talent in the Buffalo public schools, and we're growing and innovating around things like modern youth apprenticeship too, where in fact we put out requests for inquiries to our higher ed partners to see who wanted to house the credentialing and academic components on their campuses. So, I think we're part of a growth model for campuses locally. And, again, on our advisory body, we've got 4 college presidents that sit on that and work with us directly. And a member of the Graduate School of Education from UB, which is our, one of the SUNY flagship schools, sits on that body as well too. So partner. And as we've grown, we found some really interesting projects we can work on together.
So can we turn to you as we take up some of the questions? And sorry, something's gone wrong with my computer, but we're back. So Lori, one of the questions was around modeling the economic impact of this work in attainment. And John described a partnership that they have with the local university around around research, around deepening their knowledge around some of this space. How do you operationalize and assess that larger economic impact of changes in attainment at Sauk Valley, and how did you put that together?
Sure. So we're lucky enough to have what we call the Illinois Community College Board. Not all states have a community college board, but they measure the economic impact of each community college. Now we have to put forth a lot of data sets that they pull from iPads, and we are also accredited through the Higher Learning Commission, and they pull together a lot of that data, a lot of that information for us. But of course, we assess our own, and we do that through a multitude of ways, including surveys, focus groups, and working with our local not-for-profits to understand the economic impact of what we're doing. So we do know, according to an independent study that we had commissioned, that a student that attends Sauk Valley Community College and graduates with a credential or degree will make $750,000 more in their lifetime. Now, when you're talking to kids and trying to cement this college completion mindset, you're not going to go and talk to a fifth grader about economic development and what it means for them to pay taxes, right? That's not how you get kids excited. Talking about the hype, and I loved hearing about the hype, the hope hype. That was cool. I'm going to steal that from you, John. But when we're talking to kids early on, you know, again, you want to grab their attention. You want to do what you can to get them excited about college. And when we tell them, how many of you want to make close to $1 million more in your lifetime, that gets their attention. Or when you share with them, how many of you want, you know, a $50,000 scholarship to attend college? Well, you can do that through our impact program, or you can earn that $500,000 more by attending Sauk. So we're talking to them in terms of something that hypes them up and gets them excited. And again, we have those different measures of the Illinois Community College Board, the Higher Learning Commission, and also by doing our own surveys in terms of our economic development here in the region. So that's how we collect our data. We're really great to have we're really fortunate to have a great IRB office here. Even though we're a small community college, we have that, and we measure that with our employers and looking at how much wages they're making, how much our alumni are making, and whether or not they're able to support their family on those wages. So working with our alumni through the surveys to see what they're doing. So we have a multitude of ways of collecting that data.
And like John, there's so many other potential partners on the research and evaluation side, and a lot of agencies and institutions and governments, WIBs and others that have both either the resource or at least the requirement from their new state and federal grants, the billions of dollars of grants all over the place, to report on exactly this thing. And so I think what we found in some regions is that there are plenty of folks ready to answer some of these questions and to be research partners, even if they're not necessarily action partners in that space. So John's example at the university, and you, Laura, in terms of what's happening inside the college, are great touch points for how we might tackle that. So next to as we go deeper into the questions, we've got a couple questions that are really about the nature of, like, what do we mean by partnership in progress in the first place? And so I think both Matthew and Allison have raised questions around this, and you've touched on this a bit, John. So these partnerships, we're bringing together, first of all, different people. That part of the intent here through the regional challenge is that more voices are at the table. Folks who have traditionally been disenfranchised or not part of the process are here, along with our deans and vice chancellors, and along with our chamber representatives. And so a diversity of not just points of view, but of timescales, folks who have different hunger and urgency around different things at the same moment. That's different from maybe a traditional partnership that we might be thinking about. And at the same time, folks who are there because they see a fierce urgency to dramatically change student achievement and hit that 70% goal next year. Others who are trying to build relational trust over time with the expectation that that will provide the foundation for big change over the long term. And others who are frustrated with a lack of action by today's players, but now they're sharing the table with them. These are the naughty problems of of deep, diverse, authentic partnerships. And so maybe we could engage a little bit in that space around what your experience may be, any advice that you may have about how to blend those together and to operationalize them, both in governance, like how do you design a governance structure that accounts for that to the extent that you can? How can you design for adaptation over time? And then, as Allison asked, how do you assess impact in that space? When if some folks are interested in increasing the graduation rate or the rate of residents who are getting their phlebotomy certificates, and others are interested in building relational trust over time, how do you assess impact in these various different ways, or can you? And what have been some of the lessons that you've learned through the work that each of you has been doing?
I don't mind jumping in if that's okay, Christopher and Lori and John.
Thanks for doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Say Yes Buffalo, what matters. I mean, we could try and measure a million things. At the end of the day, we're really interested in that high school completion rate, post-secondary completion, and wage attainment, moving students to a mid-skill, mid-wage position with a pathway to grow. If I was really going to simplify the three things that we try and measure, that's it. Now, there's a bunch of other indicators along the way, and there's certainly some equity lens things we look at within that. But those are measurable in any community in this country, right? And I think that they're things that people broadly agree upon as important. And that can be the guiding, I guess, data points to get this up and running. So that's the approach we've taken at Buffalo. We did that with our partners at the beginning. It was nothing that was done to them. It was with them. And that was the, I guess, North Star type data points that brought us together. And, as we grew, again, we could take on more. At the beginning, when we were just launching, it was high school focused and post-secondary matriculation focused. And 5-6 years later, certainly that post-secondary completion was something that we were starting to see for the first time and something that we wanted to build on. And I think the final thing I'd note is those are systemic data points. We all have pockets of greatness in our community. We all have programs that work, but, there's no but about programs that work outside of the fact that it's not systemic. And if we really want to move the needle, we've got to think systemically and big picture on this stuff.
I'd agree with David there. And I would also say, and I tried to type out one answer in the chat. I think a couple things. I think there's a positive that comes with the qualitative side of the data, and being able to articulate effectively the stories that we all can share from all of our experiences in working with our partners, and with the students, and whether it's parent scholars, student scholars for us in Hope Toledo, and then the partners. So I think there's something there on the qualitative side, but on the quantitative side, how do you take that qualitative information and put it into a quantified space? For us, what we're starting to do is to really track our touch points with each of our scholars, what types of touch points are generating the types of results that are necessary. So one of the things that we've heard a cry for, if I can add that, and we don't have data yet to necessarily prove this out, but we've heard very clearly that there is a need for mentorship in some way, and how students are able to see what they want to become, and how we are able to bring that into life. What we have seen is that the more often our scholars are able to touch either an academic advisor or someone there on their campus that allows them to navigate through a process, it makes all the difference in the world. And we do see, and we can quantify this piece of data, we do see an increase in class attendance. We see an increase in homework completion, things of that nature, which is obviously resulting in better grades at the end of that semester. So we have we've done this for 2+ years now. So we've got some students that are entering their 3rd year of their post-secondary experience, and we can clearly note, and some of this was not anyone's fault, but we entered into this work at the beginning of COVID. And so the lack of connection, the lack of touch points, all those different things. I mean, we had students sitting in dorm rooms without being able to go to class, but having to do online class and all those different things. And it impacted them significantly, their ability to get into the classroom, have those touch points with either an academic advisor, an on-campus counselor, any one of those types of things. We've seen the impact of that. So we're starting now to quantify that information to see what those impacts are, and if year over year, semester over semester, we see grade increase. Also things like social and emotional well-being. So we did in our surveying and in our research, we asked questions like, how do you feel from a loneliness perspective, an anxiety perspective, things of those natures. We've really worked hard to try to get the right questions that we can wrap around this, so that from a research perspective, we can drive towards some real data points that can be useful down the road. Again, we're early in the process, so we've not been at this too long. So we're working through what that data looks like, and obviously more than willing to share as we get more and we push through. But I think those are key points.
And Abby, if you're Abby Jim from WASAC, if you're still with us, would you? I know you have some insight into this question as well that you might be able to share with us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Could I ask you to quickly reframe that question for me in the WASAC perspective?
Yeah, it's the question around how to balance the need to deliver services and outcomes right now, with the importance of also moving at the speed of trust with partners, and with partners who've never been at the table and haven't been treated equitably or haven't even been in these multi-institutional coalitions before.
Thanks, Christopher. And thanks all of you for already weighing in on your perspectives in that. From the WASAC perspective, one of the pieces that we've tried to maintain is this level of flexibility for what we're asking for in this currently a draft form, but what will become our letter of interest. Part of that process is so WASAC can sit down with these potential applicants and really discuss. So after the letter of interest is submitted, we hope to have a really authentic discussion that goes all directions to really talk about what is realistic to measure and what's been proposed and what makes sense for the communities and partners who are at the table. So I think it's largely an it depends answer, but it is also the emphasis that we really believe in the strength of partnerships. And we know that perhaps unlike traditional government grants in the past, those deliverables might look really different. And so we've got an evaluation team in WASAC that's going to help us navigate through those and determine what those final points of measurements are and what actually looks realistic. So a bit of the balancing act that everybody has already named. And I think a reality from us on the grantor end of saying, we're going to work through it with you. It's going to look different for every partnership. And we really invite the conversation from applicants to tell us what measures might make sense and what things we might be able to sense make of and track over time. Of course, we'll have some deliverables, but I think we can relieve the pressure of needing to have all the answers up front of what those measures look like and what those inputs and outcomes are, and will be part of the discussion conversation.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Abby. And as we're rolling up to the end of our time together, I want to ask each of our panelists, well, first to thank each of you for the extraordinary amount of time and care that you put into this conversation. It's been incredibly rich with ideas and with resources, with cautions and with tools for our listeners today. So thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation today. But maybe if you could share with us, a quick 1 minute, like how would you counsel folks to keep students at the center in this work at the regional coalition phase that can often seem really big and policy and long term. I know John is about to get off this call and then drive a single student 40 minutes away to college in order to make sure that single student makes it to the next step. That's a great example. But how do we keep students at the center of this work in a quick 30 to 60 second soundbite? Lori, let's start with you.
Sure. So the way I do that is I remember where I came from. I am a first generation college student from a low income background, and I'm sure many of you on the call can also identify with those traits. And when it's the first day of class and I see a student that's stammering in the parking lot and not sure whether or not they are brave enough or smart enough to step foot into the college, you talk to that person and you bring them there. You bring them into the college. And as you're designing programs and creating or working through the bureaucracy of things, remember that student that you were when you were a first generation college student from a low income background. So that's what keeps me going and helps me to keep the student in the center.
Thanks, Lori. David.
So the seeds we planted a decade ago have grown now. We had our full team retreat yesterday. A young woman that was a freshman in high school when we launched Say Yes Buffalo has completed college, completed her master's degree, was our keynote speaker yesterday. And we had had a pretty big bank merger here where our local bank M&T merged with People's and became the 11th biggest bank in the country. And there's so many incredible and high paying back office jobs here, many of them centered around tech. And it's in the biggest building in New York State outside of New York City, which I don't know how much that says, but it's a big building, can be a little intimidating for people at times. And her job is to welcome people into the building and program so that everybody understands that tech is for them. So she's the community relations manager for the M&T Tech Hub. And it's an awesome job in a bank. And they're tapping her to do things left and right outside of her current job because she's so talented and is adding value in the space. So I do that by staying connected to our students, getting to know them, getting to know their stories and sharing their stories because we've got thousands like that. And they are, they're leading, they're ready to lead. And the young woman that spoke yesterday really moved us, being 10 years old now and sharing her story from day one to where she is now working with M&T Bank. So it was powerful. And I hope each of you have those stories a decade from now too, as you start to do this incredible work.
John?
Yeah, that is super powerful, David. I think a couple things that I would encourage everybody that's listening. One is really underscoring what Lori said. Remember where you started and where you what drove you not just into the work, but what you had to overcome in order to navigate through the space. I would say that we consistently, and I do this with our team as well as every community partner that we work with. I say all the time in every meeting that I walk in, the reason why we're here is to create better outcomes for our children. And that's not just words for me. It is actual focus. It is actual demonstrated efforts and work. And I think I think our words matter in how we say things and how we drive things. And so we have to consistently do that. And then the last thing I would say is please, by all means, don't be afraid to lean into the hard stuff. I shared with our young people as they're heading into fall semester that life is not necessarily going to be super easy, nor will it get easier as you keep navigating through. There's going to be hard stuff, right? Hard stuff is going to happen. How do you handle the hard stuff? That's the question I asked our kids. And so I say that to each of you because as you walk through this journey, trust and believe there's going to be some hard things. And so the question is how do you handle the hard stuff? And I have to underscore what David said at the beginning of this. As he was complimenting WASAC in their work, I think it is crucial for all of us and for you all, especially as you're engaging in this work, to really think about the community aspect, the compassion that's needed, and more importantly, the consistency that is needed to keep doing this work every single day. And then we can all have stories like David just shared 10 years later of what will happen. And that comes from consistency and character building as we're working through the process. So again, big thanks to WASAC and all of you for listening for just a few minutes. And Chris, great job.
All right, thank you so much. On behalf of the Washington Student Achievement Council, I want to thank our panel again, and thanks to all of our participants today as well. Many of you have been joining WASAC for the extensive consultation and collaboration to build out this program after it was funded by the legislature, and it's very much appreciated, and that design continues. And so please continue to share your ideas, your learnings, your hopes, your feelings about the design with the WASAC team and at the council itself. But again, thanks to everybody for joining us today, and thanks to our incredible panel for giving us some terrific insights, ideas, inspiration, hope, and tools. Thanks, everybody. And there will be a copy of the recording to be shared in addition to even more resources again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.